I'm Joe Sakari. I'm chairman of the Fan History Project, which is sponsoring these Zoom sessions and also has the website fanac.org and also fancyclopedia.org, which Mark Olson is the editor. Today, we're going to have a big session with Jim and Greg Benford, and they're going to tell us about their fanish and professional careers and all kinds of other questions. And I'm not going to do an introduction for the two of them because they're going to tell you about the two of them. So, Jim, Greg, it's all yours.
Okay. Hello, everybody. We're going to go through, in chronological order, our history in fandom, starting from T=0, that is being a kid, and all the way up to present day activities, with emphasis on the people we've met and the things that made turning points in our lives in relation to fandom. And so without further ado, I will share this screen. This is the, well, let's start with the first slide. Here's a picture of us on the Green River about in 10 years ago now. We were 70 years old then, and we were singing the Void Boys song as part of a song and dance routine. I thought that was a good way to start.
On the Green River.
But we were born at an early age, and this is an early mode of transportation that we liked a lot. We liked to travel, and when Dad came home from the army, he fought his way all the way from Normandy to Austria and came back expecting to be sent to the invasion of Japan, but physics intervened, and there we are. He took his uniform off, and he rejoined the army some years later after going back to education and finding out there was no more career for him there and no more advancement. So there we are in 1945. And this is a little while later, I don't know the year. And you could, to us, it's easy to tell ourselves apart, isn't it, Greg?
Yes, I'm on the
left. You're clearly the guy on the left with the unequal eyes.
Right.
Yeah. And then we went to Germany when Dad rejoined the army and such. We ended up going to Germany, first to Japan, actually, in the occupation. 1949 to 52, very interesting. In fact, that was a very formative thing for us. We went to a foreign country which is really as different as you could get from South Alabama. It couldn't be more different. Japan with a little electrification, cars that ran on burning charcoal, steam cars, in other words. And it was a real revelation to see the world could be entirely different.
Yes, but Void 1 was published in Germany. Actually, no, it was published in Atlanta just before we left the States.
No. Let's discuss our history. We got interested in fandom from reading science fiction mags, and we read a column, I think it was in Imagination, that said there was an Atlanta science fiction group. And we called up and went to a meeting in Atlanta in 1954 and bought a copy of The Immortal Storm, but that didn't put us off. And we decided to produce a fanzine. And the first fanzine, my writings of the time say our first fanzine was actually called Vacuum.
Yes.
And we don't have a copy, and we don't know anyone who does. Joe, if you can find it, it would be full of laughs, I'm sure. But I don't know if we mailed it to anybody, or I can't remember anything except
we're hoping that no copies remain.
Yes, we're kind of hoping, yeah. And let's put it this way: we'd like to buy all the copies. Shall we put it that way? But we didn't like the name Vacuum so much.
First, it was hard to spell.
Yeah, it's so hard to spell. But Void we liked. And so our first distributed fanzine was Void with an amazing cover by an anonymous. It's not signed, is it?
Deliberately.
We chose Void because void has two meanings, you know. It means vacuum, of course, emptiness, but it also means as in voided, that is, you void a stamp, that sort of thing, and that is canceled.
Yeah, but
null and void.
it also means excrete, leading to the bumper sticker, not you are what you eat, but you are what you excrete, void.
Well, moving right along, that was hectographed. I don't know if you even buy a hectograph anymore, and you shouldn't if you can, because they were terrible. We managed to produce one issue with the hectograph, and as you can see, hectograph doesn't survive very well. You see how stained it's gotten just from the process itself over the well, let's see now. It's now 66 years ago we produced that. And it was early 55.
You couldn't get more than about 10 copies. Increasing the odds against it, although we do have one copy.
Yeah, I've got a copy. And so we produced that in Germany, in Frankfurt, Germany. Actually, no, the first issue was in a little town called Gießen, which was heavily bombed. There were still ruins around. And we got a remarkable amount of response to it, considering the low quality. Greg, you put this slide in. You wanted
just to point out our background. We grew up in farm country of Southern Alabama. And this is a picture of me in 1974 or 5 with our grandmother and our favorite collie dog at her farm. That's how rural it all was. The farm was still in operation when this was taken, and she died at the age of 82 about a year later. But the point is, that's where we came from. That's where we grew up, in farm country, Southern Alabama. So going to suddenly Japan, when our father was offered a regular Army commission, but mostly, I think, in his opinion, because he was very good at staying alive on a battlefield. He was a forward observer for a howitzer battalion that went into Normandy in the first week or so. And there were 16 forward observers. The Germans were very good at picking out forward observers because it took off the game board American artillery, which has always been our strong suit because we can make a lot more ammo than others. Anyway, of those 16, only my father survived. And he was given a commission in the Army as a captain, which was his last rank at the end of World War II, and sent to Japan. And boy, talk about alien cultures. Imagine being 9 years old and going from rural Alabama to downtown Tokyo.
8 years old, actually.
8?
It was 1949.
Yeah, 8 years old. So the point is, we were introduced to alien surroundings very early. And in Japan, we began reading a lot of science fiction, particularly Heinlein juveniles.
Right.
And
big influence.
We were so enamored, we bought the hardcover of Farmer in the Sky using, I think, was it 2 or 3 months of our allowance?
Yeah.
And I've still got that. Yeah. Next.
Yeah, in fact, here it is. Here's Farmer in the Sky from the 1950s. So let me see how I get that here. Farmer in the Sky. It's hard to get right in the focal plane.
So when you're using false background, stuff jumps in and out.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. Okay. So we arrived in Frankfurt in 56. And this is a photograph of us. And we were producing Void at a pretty fast clip, actually. Our objective was to be, original objective was to be monthly, right, Greg?
Yes. We were mailing it through the Army mail system, and it had to get to North America. I thought it was incredibly ambitious.
Yeah, it was. We got a lot of response from the Europeans because this might have been the first fanzine produced in Europe. I don't really know.
It was first in Germany for sure.
And it was certainly was the first fanzine produced in Europe in English. But we got responses from mainly from the British, but also from
Jan Janssen.
Jan Janssen and Julian Parr and Stoyle and a lot of
Jean
folks.
Leonard. And
Pardon?
Jean Leonard too.
Yes.
In France.
And we were visited by various people who was the Air Force guy who came and visited us?
Ellis Mills.
Ellis Mills, who's now deceased. All of those people we met then were, because we were so young and it's so much later, they're all deceased now. But we got a lot of response actually, considering the quality of the fanzine and its orientation, which was heavily towards science fiction. We'd write reviews of books, and then we'd write reviews of fanzines, and then we started to get articles from people like Joe Gibson and John Barry, John Barry of the Irish Persuasion, and it took off. We started to get a lot of letter column hacks, like Dick Ellington, for example, and it sort of took off. And we got to Void 6, we decided to shift our focus away from science fiction and more toward fanish things, because we liked it more. And we liked the style of the fanish fans, like the Southern California group, et cetera. And so we began to shift focus toward fandom in the fanzine, and continued to publish Voids from 6, 7, 8, 9. And then Ann Stoyle wanted to have a con in 1956. You can see here, I'm the guy hanging back there in the middle of the picture. We had a very strange kind of a con for 2 days in Wetzlar, which is a very small town between Frankfurt and Gießen. And we, a number of people, most of the people came were from Germany, but we also got Jan Janssen and from Holland, and then Greg was there too, of course. And here's Greg on the left there with Ann Stoyle.
And Jan Janssen between us.
Yes, Jan Janssen.
And the fellow in the jacket across the poster wearing glasses is Walter Ernsting, who founded German science fiction and started the first German SF magazine, and also published, unfortunately, the crappy long series that Fari Ackerman's wife translated from the Deutsch, Perry Rodan.
Perry Rodan, yeah.
So
wasn't he?
He's a very interesting guy.
He was
he had been captured at Stalingrad, spent years in the Gulag, and was repatriated in the late 40s, and decided, strangely enough, to go into publishing.
Mm-hmm. And there you can see us outside the theater, which is about to show, because of the con, War of the Worlds, which had really just come out around that era, and was probably wouldn't have been seen in that small German town if we hadn't had the con there. So that was the first con in continental Europe, and seeing how well it worked out, we decided to never be involved in conventions again.
Well, not quite. We took part in the Dallas convention. Which
you're right. Let's move on to the Dallas convention. Okay. We went to Dallas, okay? And Jerry Heinz, our friend, who was a good artist actually, who did this, that was this picture is the Void 11, isn't it?
11.
It's 11, and it's the first one published in Dallas, and it says here, what is our first step in the conquest of Dallas fandom?
Right.
Right, yeah, right.
The car is a Renault Dauphine that our family brought back from.
It was small, but not that small.
Yeah.
And
and
so
again, I'm on the left.
Now, what we found in Dallas was on the cover of Void 12. A lot of very sleepy fans, okay?
That's 13.
There's Greg on the left reading. I'm doing electronics. I was really big in electronic assembly. That is, I was building circuits and such way back when I was in Germany. And that led to me being experimental physicist. And you can see that there's Tom Reamy in between us, who later emerged as a writer.
Right. And Reamy is asleep.
Died early. What's that?
That's the point, is everybody else in the frame is asleep, except I drew at the bottom on the stencil an imitation of a Dave Reich picture.
Yes.
Because they were responsible for the Tower to the Moon, right?
Yeah, right.
Seeking
And George
completion.
Mester did the cover.
And so that's one representative from Bay Area fandom.
And Kent Muma thought we would ignite the fan community in Dallas. I think Al Jackson, who's in the audience here right now, would tell you that that was you need three things to start a fire. One, you need fuel. Two, you need air. Three, you need temperature. You need heat. Well, it didn't have very good material. There was plenty of hot air around, but it wasn't hot enough to ignite Dallas fandom. And yet there was a con. The first, was it the first Southwestern con?
Yes, it was the first con in Texas.
Yeah, we participated in that. And here's Al Jackson's Southwestern Con 6. I guess it wasn't the first Southwestern Con, it was the first in Texas, huh?
Well, it was the first real con.
Oh.
I mean, they call it a con if they had a party before that.
So there's stories about that con because Fari Ackerman came to it all the way from LA. Marion Zimmer Bradley lived in the panhandle of Texas and she flew in to Dallas. And we met her at the airport. She disapproved of us because we didn't agree with her about the islands of Quemoy and Matsu. Now, some of you may not remember those islands, and I'm not going to talk about it. They're just offshore China. And but that was MZB before she headed west and into fame. She was a bit cantankerous. And that didn't change. But off she went and made her fortune on things having to do with basically with King Arthur, right? So, but the guy who visited us and went to the con was Kent Muma, who wrote a con report. Was that the last thing he wrote, Greg?
I think so. He had finished his great fan story, which we later published in Boyd, before writing the con report, and he committed suicide several months later, 30 minutes after his draft physical, where a sergeant told him, well, of course we're going to draft you, but they'd say that to everyone going through a draft physical. We did ours years later, of course. And he took it for real.
In order to get people to volunteer. They got extra points if they could get volunteers. So they would say to everybody, we're going to draft you, but you could volunteer. And then you can get a choice about what you do. And he didn't want either one, so he slit his wrists. It was a great loss to fandom because he would have been a great 1960s fan. He would have loved the evolution of the fanish style in the 1960s, which was not only Void, but also the Terry Carr, Ron Elick, the whole LA Burby surge, and Ted White and his many minions, and he missed a great era in fandom. In fact, he also
wanted to write fiction, science fiction.
Yeah,
that's why he wrote.
He was a good writer.
Great work as a story.
Yeah, he wrote that fictional fan piece. Yeah. What's it called? The Avengers, the Artisans.
No, the Adversaries.
The Adversaries. It was about fiction about fans. In any case, it was let's put it this way: on the scale of conventions, it was better than the one in Germany, in Wetzlar. But that's not saying much by modern standards. But Dale Hart was there, and Tom Reamy, Al Jackson, as you can well see, and all the other fans that gave Greg great material for his comedy pieces he wrote as editorials in Void. And this fed Greg material for many years afterwards. You know, a lot of.
I dined out on Dallas fandom for years.
Yeah, you could make a small collection of articles about Dallas fandom, which painted them in a humorous light. But we were getting ready to go into physics. We wanted to make Heinlein juveniles real, didn't we? And so at the end of Void 13, it was time to go off to college. And I decided to stop. That and the death of Kent Mumma made me decide that I didn't want to work on fanzines anymore. But Steve Stiles did this cartoon of us being influenced by Einstein. Neither one of us wanted to be Einstein, but he certainly was the most prominent figure in physics at that time. Still is, I suspect. I remember my grandmother, who was born back in the 19th century, who always referred to him as that German fellow, and but she knew who he was. And this is somebody who spent her whole life on farms in a remote part of Alabama. So off we went, and just to move right along, we then went to grad school. This is our entry photographs in UC La Jolla, 1963. They made the mistake of changing the name 3 years later to UC San Diego. La Jolla is a much better place than San Diego, and the university is actually in La Jolla. But just like UCLA would really be better titled UC Westwood, or maybe UC Beverly Hills, instead it's just Los Angeles. So we went off to UCSD, and at this point, I think, as a point of departure for us, going off to grad school, getting married, moving into jobs, I think at this point we might open the mic, so to speak, and see if anyone has any questions or comments they'd like to make at this time.
Of course, you skipped over our undergraduate career, which is at the University of Oklahoma. We both got 4-year scholarships there. And since it was thrifty, and we were working in the summer at Texas Instruments, where we really started to do solid state physics. We were in the research group. We did very well in Oklahoma, and Jim got what, an NSF fellowship, and I got a Woodrow Wilson fellowship to UC La Jolla.
You got the Woodrow Wilson. I got a fellowship from Rocketdyne, which still exists.
Right, that's it.
Yeah, which still exists and still making rockets. But I didn't even apply for it. It was those days, money was flowing like water in the R&D business. And I got a scholarship that I didn't even apply for. So it shows you the tenor of the times. Do we have any questions?
I've got one. When you started Void, you said you had good response. Did you get response from the people that you considered the big names of the day? And, were any of them really surprising to you? Who did you admire at that time? Who did you want to be like?
Well, Ron Bennett, Walt Willis, Dick Ellington, the whole Belfast group. Who else?
Boyd Rayburn.
Oh, of course, Boyd Rayburn.
Right.
Yes. In fact, Boyd Rayburn came and visited us in Frankfurt at the time of the 1957 Worldcon in London, which our parents, we had registered for. We're on the list of registered attendees, and we had hotel reservations. Our parents refused to let us go. They didn't want us to make an international trip by ourselves, although we had made such a trip to England only a few months earlier with our mother. But she didn't think we could do it. Although we had traveled to something like 17 countries by that time, she didn't think we could, on our own, get to London and back without being wrongly influenced or robbed.
Right. Weirdly enough, we went by ourselves in a closed train to East Germany. I still have my passport for that, stamped by the Soviet Union. We went to East Germany, but too much of a deal to go to England.
Yeah.
Crazy.
East Berlin, West Berlin. Yeah, we went into East Berlin. It was such a ruin. The Russians deliberately didn't rebuild Berlin, their sector. They just let it lie in ruins.
It was run down, gloomy, depressing, and that was just the people.
But Edie asks, who did we really admire at the time? Well, practically everybody, because they were better writers than we were. And we appreciated sitting there in this isolated, really desperately poor Europe of the 1950s to get this interesting correspondence. I remember we'd laugh like hell when we got issues of, what was the Harlan Ellison Mad Dogs cover fanzine?
Psychotic?
Psychotic, yeah, Psychotic, you know.
This
The
is the
Mad
kind of stuff
Dogs
you have on your
with
hand
Edie
drive.
in the groin, yeah.
Can't get off.
That was so, well, anyway, we appreciated that lifeline of connectivity to a community that was interested in things we were interested in. So it was really influential for us because we were living in houses, quote, on the economy, unquote, which meant that we weren't near other Americans. We were surrounded by Germans. And they were nice big houses with servants.
It's useful learning German. By the way, we lived in the mansions of ex-heads of the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany, otherwise known as Nazis. And because the US confiscated all those, and we used them as long as we were in the occupying power to live in. These are 3 stories plus basement and attic, 1 groundsman, 1 fireman, and 2 maids.
Very nice.
My mother loved it.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. So, okay, any other questions? Comments?
I have one. This is my first time here. It's Ort Wine. So do I understand then that you met Forey Ackerman in person at the Dallas Con?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were.
Doesn't seem like there was a convention he didn't go to back then. Like.
Yeah. Right. Well, he actually went there to meet MZB. He said he wanted to represent her as an agent.
Yeah, right, because he was an agent back then.
Actually, Forey was kind of, and Marion were last minute replacements because the actual guest of honor became ill and died not long after. Let's see, what was he? Guy who's very good at extremely short stories. It'll come to me in a
Frederick
minute.
Brown?
Yes, Fred Brown.
Uh-huh.
Who was living in New Mexico.
Uh-huh. So, in any case, they did an embarrassing TV spot in which they spoke Spanish to each other.
Oh, yes.
Which I found profoundly embarrassing for all my friends.
I remember one sentence that said, "I want to pub my ish so I can get ego boo."
That sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, well.
So, okay, well, all right. So off to California and getting PhDs. Now we leap ahead a few years, and Greg, you want to speak to this? This is a young fellow. Do you remember this guy? He used to be a prominent fan, didn't he?
This is what I still think was one of the very best of all world cons, the 68. I had already got my PhD by that time. And was on I was a postdoc for Edward Teller at this moment. And Ted was so wonderfully well dressed, even in the Claremont in the heat.
Yeah, I think he peaked then, yeah.
And that was a great room party. Next slide, you can see another shot from that same room party. And if there are people present here, of course, what we're looking at here is John Barry on the ground, the American John Barry, me standing up there in yellow, Bill Donahoe on the couch. The guy between me and Bill is the fellow who was the FBI informant in Las Vegas.
FBI, yeah.
FBI, what did I say? At the FBI, he was Stan Wolson, was that it? And
Yes.
of course, that's Boyd Rayburn there on the right. The guy in the middle.
With his mouth open, yeah.
Pardon? I don't know who that guy
Boyd,
is.
with his mouth open has frequently happened.
Yeah.
Chuck Freudenthal,
So,
I think.
That's the same room party.
Yeah.
History in the making. And
Yeah,
only
and of
I
course,
and John are
there's
alive.
John Barry, of course, on the floor.
Right.
Yes, gazing in admiration at Rayburn,
Yes.
who was had just about, he'd finished publishing by that time, hadn't he?
Yeah, but he was a seriously active fan. I mean, look at it this way. He was interested in us, and we exchanged letters and everything. So while going to London, he flew to Frankfurt and spent several days with us, and then went to the WorldCon.
Yeah.
By the way,
And
Ron
then we-
Bennett came over to visit us too while we were in Frankfurt.
Do you remember there was a non-con in LA
Right.
at Burby's place? I think we met at Burby's place in 1963 because the con was somewhere else, but far
Yeah.
away. Rayburn came to the non-con to meet the LA fans.
Right.
He flew all the way out to
Well,
LA from Toronto.
He was an
just to see
executive
people.
for
That's
a pen company, but writing fountain pens of high quality. And so he flew around a lot. He
Yeah.
also spent his winter vacation with the Silverbergs in the Caribbean on an island for a couple of weeks.
Many
He had
years,
money.
many times, yeah.
Great guy, very witty guy.
Very.
I
Yeah.
imitated his derogations in Void, Der Fandom derogation, because in Abba he was taking down very foolish fans, including me at one point.
Yeah, that's a great tradition, the derogation. I'd like to see it revived.
Right.
But Rayburn invented it and was perfect at it. But basically, you take people's real quotes, and then you have your friends, the other characters in the derogation, talk about that and laugh about it, and then a quote from some other fughead, and it would go on like that. The derelicti derogations were quite an art form that he put in ABBA for many times.
Derelicti was the name they formed for the Toronto fan group, and
Yeah.
the derogations raised Snide to a new height.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Then there's 1965, jumping back a little.
That's a con in, was it Long Beach?
I was in Long Beach, and there's Don Fitch, and of course, Eleanor Busby, and Donahoe on the right, and me looking startled.
Right.
That
the back
was,
of that head we see maybe Earl Kemp, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So see, we were young and foolish and hanging out with lowlifes.
And there's leaping ahead to the 70s. There's Greg with Sid Coleman. Sid was a great fan. He was one of the founders of Advent Press, and a physicist. He worked with Shelley Glashow at Harvard, but who did he work with at Caltech in his PhD? I've forgotten.
He got his PhD under Murray Gell-Mann.
Mary Gell-Mann, yeah.
And
all of them got Nobel Prizes, but Sid hoed his own row in physics, doing a very careful. He was a keeper of the flame of keeping everything theoretically correct in mathematical form.
In quantum field theory.
In quantum field theory, which is an extremely difficult subject.
Yes.
And he would correct many people, like the ones we just mentioned, on points of field theory. And he was a very active fan, but he wasn't a fanzine fan. He didn't produce fanzines at all, to my knowledge.
He wrote for them.
He wrote for them, and he was a great humorist, a teller of stories. And he would come out to the Bay Area. By that time, I was living in the Bay Area. I had moved here in '69, and there was a critical mass of fandom in the Bay Area. Just lots and lots of people. Terry Carr and his wife. I mean, it's the Silverbergs, the Andersons. It was a huge list. I wrote a piece about it in FAPA a few years ago about how many fans there were. So there were huge parties at the holiday season in December, Christmas Eve, New Year's.
Yes.
The Ellingtons had a big party Christmas Eve. The Carrs had a huge party for New Year's Eve. And Sid would come out for the whole thing. He would be there the entire season. And he also spent most of his summers at Stanford or at the Stanford Linear Accelerator or at UC Berkeley, so he could interact with the fans of the Bay Area. And so I would go out hiking with him quite a lot. Overall, we went over all the major trails of the Bay Area, which has a huge park district. And I talked to him about a lot of things, and he was a great guy. And unfortunately died quite a long time ago of a terrible disease.
Lewy body.
Yeah, Lewy body.
Body variant of Parkinson's.
Yeah.
Sid actually did look somewhat like Einstein.
A lot. His widow is with World Press producing a volume this year of his letters.
Right.
And I think it's just letters from him, right?
Right.
And with a whole lot of photographs and memorabilia about Sid, which I am eager to get a hold of.
Right.
And so he'll be remembered. He wrote one slim volume about theoretical physics. And that's it in terms of, he had many scientific papers. He had maybe his most infamous paper proved that the dark energy was exactly zero. He proved it theoretically from fundamental grounds, right? And then in the middle 90s, when we found that dark energy was accelerating the universe, that the Hubble expansion wasn't a uniform, straight fixed velocity, but was in fact accelerating, I asked him, well, what about your proof? You proved that it was identically zero, and here we know it's far from zero. And he said, easy come, easy go.
Right. Well, it was based on quantum tunneling calculation, which was very shaky, I thought. But he's once said to me, if I ever win the Nobel Prize, it will be because I predicted that lambda was equal to zero. And now, of course, there goes the prize.
Because it isn't zero, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, next slide. 1980s.
This is what I was doing with my fanzine talents that I had. I really did learn how to write with Void and other places I wrote for. So when there was a contest at FNSF in 1964 for the best 1,000-word story about a unicorn and a univac, I entered the contest and won, getting $20 to publish the story and a lifetime sub to FNSF, which is still running. And this is a meeting, by the way, of those who were the advisors to the Writers of the Future, which was financed by a special donation, a special trust set up by L. Ron Hubbard, and which is the highest rewarding prize in the field by far, because you get, the best prize is $10,000, but you also get to fly to LA and get a week of instruction and a lot of other stuff. And so these people were on the board that judged the stories. Only I am now alive. That's going across. That's me. Somehow I'm always on the left in these photos. Fred Pohl, Jim Gunn, Brian Aldous, and Jack Williams. We're standing in front of the Saturn V that's lying on its side in Houston. There's also one in Huntsville. And you can see, we're just looking into the nozzles. See, there's one right behind my head, and there's one right behind Jack Williams' head. Give you an idea of the scale. So the point is, I started an SF career when I was in grad school, selling short stories, mostly to FNSF, and it just steamrolled. It's certainly been a productive hobby, and because I incorporated myself in 1979, given the advance on my novel Timescape, which was $200,000, I mean, that was serious money in those days, then I was able to keep it out of the hands of the tax man, which is why I'm wealthy now. Just because I saved all the money I wrote to get doing consulting and writing science fiction. So Fandom made me wealthy. There we go.
Just a point about this, that those days, the Saturn V was sitting outdoors in Houston, which is not a very convivial environment for metal, it being hot and humid. And they then built a building and moved it inside, and it's in far better shape now. They maintained it. So they preserved it rather than let it just waste away. These are the ones that were built to carry out additional lunar expeditions but Nixon canceled the program, and
Right.
that's why we have several of them around the country, which were perfectly functional, but now are museum pieces.
Yeah, and they don't show in this photo the pigeons that were roosting in the Saturn V. Yeah, there was bird guano in the nozzles, and here, copied out of some Facebook posting, is a party in the legendary Bay Area era. This is somewhere around 1980s.
This is I think this is in the 70s. I bought that vest along with Bob Lichtman in the early 70s at a place in San Francisco. That was before he ran off to the farm. But in any case, this is in my house, and we had a Halloween party, and Bob came as a pope. He's always wanted to be pope. I think his chances are pretty low since he's Jewish.
Yes.
But he made a very good pope figure. He really did. And he was willing to bless people at every turn. He was very good at it.
He ran around the party, giving benedictions and drinking Benedictine.
And he did later on. He came to some other party as a pope in a much more impressive regalia that he had rented, which was really seriously ornate. He liked dressing up as pope. Perhaps he still does, but not in public. So this is for you, Greg.
Yeah, I got a lot of pickup things. For example, I did an 8 hours of television for Japanese national television, and they sent me around to publicize it in Japan. And so this is the first launching of Asimo, a robot named, of course, for Asimov. So I recommended that the next generation of it, by the way, they called Simca, using the other offset from Asimov's name. But the point is, this robot will walk around and talk to you for a distance of about 100 meters. And this is in the late 1980s. So this one of the things in being related to science fiction is that I got this really great gig with Japanese national television, designing and writing for their show and doing the voiceover narration and going to all kinds of places in the world to shoot scenes. It was very interesting, and that show never showed in the United States because the Japanese tried to get a lot of money out of public television and they weren't buying, but it showed the entire rest of the planet, and it won the Oscar for Best Japanese Documentary of the year. But it was invisible in the US, one of those weird deals about neglecting the largest television audience in the world by trying to get too much money out, but that's another story.